Israeli forces are deliberately targeting Palestinian children. That's the conclusion of an independent UN commission. We ask its chair what led to this finding.
Children are playing outside their tent, they're shot. Children are bending to collect firewood, they are shot. So children not involved in any forms of hostilities are being shot in cold blood.
With government forces now responsible for the majority of grave violations against children, we speak with the UN Special Representative for Children and Armed Conflict.
When political leaders and with their military commanders are planning military operations, they are not giving due regard to possible civilian casualties. So they're not caring if they bomb a drone factory, which might be next to a school, and it is during school hours.
Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Ghida Fakhry. The United Nations recently found that almost 25,000 people from one specific group were victims of grave violations during conflict in 2025. They were killed, maimed, or subjected to sexual violence. That group is children. The Secretary General's annual report on children and armed conflict says that for the first time, government forces, not armed groups, were the main perpetrators. Topping the UN list are Israel's military and security forces, with nearly 9,500 violations out of almost 12,500 recorded in Israel and the Occupied Palestinian Territory. Next was the Democratic Republic of the Congo with more than 4,000. Myanmar and Somalia were each responsible for more than 2,000 violations. Government forces from Sudan, South Sudan, Syria, and Russia are also on the list. At a meeting in New York, Israel's UN ambassador Danny Danon accused the United Nations of political bias.
You caved to the Secretary General's obsession with targeting Israel.
I'm sorry, but
so,
I have to make a point of order.
You will be quiet
because this is what the chair should be doing.
You spoke,
I make a point of order. They should not be personal. It should not be personal.
You part of the bullying.
I have a point of order.
Shame on you.
I have a point of order.
You spoke,
I
now
will
I
not
speak.
walk out.
You walk out.
We have
Shame on
verified
you.
evidence.
The UN official you saw in that exchange is Vanessa Frazier, the Special Representative for Children and Armed Conflict. She joins us now. Under Secretary General Frazier, we just watched that exchange between you and the permanent representative of Israel to the United Nations, where he made repeated accusations of bias. Are there mechanisms to ensure that these reports are evidence-based, that they are never politically driven?
We are a Security Council mandate, and our mandate is formed through 14 Security Council resolutions, and it is a Security Council through its resolutions that has set up the monitoring and reporting mechanism. So it is the member states, it is the Security Council that set up the mechanism. And also when we start the drafting of the annual report, so this year in 2026, we're talking about violations 2025, the previous year, on or around the 2nd of March, every single government whose situation is documented in our report receives a first draft and has 2 months to enter into discussions with us, request more information. But the governments have the opportunity to request the information and to enter into bilateral dialogue with us in order perhaps to provide us with other information, alternative information, and in order to help influence the drafting of the reports. So Israel decided not to engage in it. They received it like everybody else did early enough, and the report was eventually published on the 19th of June, and it was a similar process for the conflict-related sexual violence report, which he is complaining about in this particular video.
And these reports have been published annually every year since the year 2000. In the case of Israel, they often say that there are double standards, that they are singled out. How would you respond to these accusations?
Our annual report covers 23 geographic situations. Israel and the Occupied Palestinian Territories is just one of them. And from all the situations that we covered, the only noise you heard about was of Israel. It is really very important because even in the press conference when I was presenting the Secretary General's report, I was saying, we have children who are suffering in many places, and in DRC, in Haiti, in Colombia, in Yemen, in Sudan. Why are we always focusing on one? It's because there's one country that opposes any form of reporting.
Israel this year in the report from the UN Secretary General, which you presented to the UN in June, topped the list of the total number of grave violations committed against children that are attributed to any government. And these violations don't just include killings, but also maiming, attacks on schools and hospitals, denials of humanitarian access. From where you sit, is Israel being singled out because of political attention or because of what the UN has documented?
It is being singled out because they put the attention on themselves. This report was about 23 situations. It was not about them. And there are also Israeli victims, which are recorded annually in the reports. So it is a distortion to the public that do not actually read the report, but only hear the way he would like to present it, to say that we are based on lies or that it is only biased against them. But the report is based on verified, irrefutable, verified data, verified by UN teams on the ground with primary and second and corroborating sources, and covers 23 situations, as I said. It is unfortunate, yes, that we have reached a grim milestone in our 30th anniversary, in that we have more state parties than non-state parties who are who have been attributed with a greater amount of violations. And this simply reflects what has been known for some time, and that there is this basically disregard to international law, because state actors are actually the ones who are bound to work within the realms of international law, right? It is non-state actors that we expect to be bad and to work outside the law, but it is not at all expected for state actors. State actors actually have the responsibility to protect civilians.
Does this profound shift also reflect the inaptitude, the failure of the United Nations to hold these government forces accountable? We see absolutely no sanctions on those responsible for the killings of children.
Tools are there, tools are available, accountability mechanisms, sanctions, but the political will is not there to use these tools. And so we see it reflected in the numbers, and children are having their rights violated always more and more, and we are seeing greater violations against them.
When certain countries, certain governments are on this annual list year after year, I believe Israel has been on the list for the past 3 or 4 years. How effective is it?
It's a great pity, because over the years, the listing in the annex of the Secretary General's report actually has been very powerful, and we have delisted many parties and many state actors over the year, because normally being listed, so being named in the report doesn't necessarily trigger a listing, but if one is listed in the annex, we have seen that governments do, and state parties, non-state actors also, do engage with us in order to be delisted, because actually being listed should trigger other tools. The problem is that since they are not being triggered now, it's losing its effect.
What do you think needs to happen to make sure that we do not continue to see this pattern?
It's in a way very cynical and ironic, because our every year at around this time, when the Secretary General's report on children on conflict is published, there's this behold blacklist. The blacklist is what the annex is called, because it's the worst list to be on. But there still is this, like, oh my goodness, we're on it. But instead of saying, mea culpa, let me see what I'm going to do, how can I do better, let's work together to do better, which I have to say almost everybody does, so it does trigger. We are working very well with some countries. For example, I was recently in Syria, and we have even a very positive message for them on our report, which says they are on the pathway to the listing, because they have started to enter into commitments with us, and if these commitments are UN verified as having been implemented, they are on the track for the listing. And last year, 3 countries were delisted. There was Iraq, Pakistan, and the Philippines. So it does work. It works a lot. And the children in those countries are more protected for many reasons, because national legislation has passed in order to protect children. If we want to have lasting, durable, sustainable peace in any of the conflict areas, we have to protect the children, because it is actually today's children that are going to sustain any peace process or peace agreement which is signed today.
Vanessa Frazier, the United Nations Secretary General's Special Representative for Children in Armed Conflict, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
While several government forces have been responsible for the majority of grave violations against children, Israel accounted for at least 1 in 4 violations in 2025. Gaza's health ministry says Israel has killed more than 73,000 people since October 2023, including more than 21,000 children. That's around 30% of the total. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres expressed his alarm at, quote, the staggering increase of violence by both Israeli forces and Israeli settlers. In June, the UN Independent International Commission of Inquiry on the Occupied Palestinian Territory, which was established in 2021, issued its latest report. The commission found that Israel had continued to commit genocide in Gaza even after the ceasefire agreement last October by deliberately targeting Palestinian children. The chair of the commission, Srinivasan Muralidhar, joins us now. Justice Muralidhar, according to the commission's findings, Palestinian children made up around 30% of all those killed by Israeli forces over the last couple of years. What persuaded you that they were not victims of incidental violence, but that they in fact were deliberately targeted and warranted their own distinct investigation?
It was a combination of factors, Ghida, but let me highlight 2 of them. One was the use of intensive airstrikes between the 2-year period, 7th October 2023 and 7th October 2025. Within the first 2 weeks of the campaign, it became clear that children were in large proportions among the casualties, but Israeli defense forces did not change their tactics. The second factor that persuaded us was the use of quadcopters, snipers, and drones to specifically target children. Quadcopters were preloaded with thermal imaging cameras. They were preloaded with single-shot bullets as well as cube-shaped pellets. So the doctors who deposed before this commission told us when the babies were brought in either already dead or in very seriously injured condition, they noticed single gunshot wounds to the head and to the neck. And this was intended to cause maximum damage. The fatalities were very high. We also have figures of orphans. In the 2-year period I'm talking about, 58,000 Palestinian children were orphaned. And Israel continued bombing the orphanages as well. So you can see that there was a clear intent to ensure that children die in large numbers. And they're seen as the continuity of the future identity of the Palestinian group. So it is a very, very planned, deliberate move by the Israeli Defense Forces to target children.
So are you saying that this was part of a broader campaign of ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people?
In fact, this is precisely what we are saying in our report, because we gave a detailed report on genocide in Gaza in September 2025. And this report of ours further confirms that. We also find, and they've said that in this report, there's a specific targeting of reproductive health. Pregnant mothers are targeted. They are malnourished. They're giving birth to low weight, extreme low weight babies, or there are stillbirths. So there is a marked increase in all of this. Then when you see this in combination with the bombing of schools, 97% of the schools in Gaza have been completely destroyed. 22 of the 38 universities completely destroyed. So you can see there is an attack on education, there's an attack on health. It's part of the larger campaign of genocide.
Yet, as you know, Justice, the Israeli government has furiously reacted to your report. They have dismissed it outright, calling it a libelous sham. The Israelis and US officials have always said that these were tragedies, that they were part of what happens in wars. How do you react to that and to the accusations you faced?
Yeah, so let me begin with the accusations to the Israeli authorities. Before we start on any report, we issue what is called a public call for submissions. Anywhere from the world, anyone can submit to us material that is relevant to the theme that we're working on, in this case, children. Israel specifically instructs its citizens not to engage with this commission, so they can't send any submissions. Having said that, there are some Israeli civil society organizations that have and continue to engage with this commission. and provide useful information. This time, after we finalized the report and released it to the public, Israel released an 18-page rebuttal. They say that we simply incorporated into our report whatever Hamas has provided us as evidence. This is completely untrue. Even when we issue public call for submissions, we're very careful to sift out anything that comes from Hamas or Hamas-related organizations. This commission simply does not take that on board, knowing fully well it is likely to be biased. Now, the instances we've spoken about in our report involves children carrying on routine activities. A 10-day-old baby boy is breastfeeding on his mother. A quadcopter is used by the Israeli soldiers to shoot a single shot bullet through his head. He cannot clearly be said to be being used as a shield by Hamas. A child is walking along with an adult. The child is killed by a single gunshot. The adult is not hurt. There are numerous instances when children are playing outside their tent, they're shot. Children are bending to collect firewood, they are shot. Children are looking to collect aid. You know, you've seen those tragic scenes where the aid packets are flung and children are running helter-skelter. Such children are shot. So children not involved in any forms of hostilities are being shot in cold blood. So these are not children who are being used as shield by Hamas.
Are you saying, Justice, that in many of these instances, the adults were spared and the children were deliberately shot?
Absolutely. And this is spoken to us by the doctors who appeared before us in the oral hearings. If you went to the Commission's website, we've uploaded the depositions of these doctors who spoke to us. You will find that some of them are breaking down even now. They're speaking to us 2 years after they visited Gaza, sometimes a year after they visited. They're still traumatized. Doctors are still traumatized by what they saw. So this is very heartrending, what is happening in Gaza today. Children are subject to very deep psychological trauma. The Israeli soldiers, when they capture adolescent boys, are asking them to strip to their briefs. They're photographing that and uploading it on social media. So there is what is called a public shaming, subjecting children to public nudity. And we have spoken about all of this.
To what extent did you rely on all of this?
To quite some extent. It was not the only material we relied upon, but we found it astonishing that so much incriminating material in the form of films taken by soldiers of themselves doing these acts, of them bragging about their acts on television, on the channels in Israel. We were astonished to find, even today, you can go on the YouTube and find some of these clips and video reels of this. And it is extremely astonishing that the Israeli authorities have not initiated disciplinary proceedings against such soldiers who are acting in such a brazen manner with the full knowledge that nothing is going to happen to them.
Is it perhaps because these soldiers may be following broader orders, at the very least military command?
Yes, we've referred to the command. We've referred to the soldier who belongs to the command who has said how his commander complimented him for killing a child using a quadcopter. Another commander egged his soldier, saying that forget about the age of your target, go ahead and kill. We can clearly establish the chain of command. And the background to this kind of a thinking, we've quoted two extreme right-wing politicians in Israel, the deputy speaker of the Knesset, who views every child born in Gaza as born as a terrorist. They say this in as many words. And there is another right-wing, Mr. Feiglin, who says the enemy is not Hamas. Every baby born in Gaza is our enemy. So the thinking is, don't allow children, first of all, to be born. If they are born, eliminate them. It's a very clear message from the far-right politicians, which is permeated to the Israeli defense forces, which is why we think they're acting with such impunity.
But just how far up the political chain of command does this go? Because the Israeli human rights organization B'Tselem found in its latest report published in June that the widespread killing of children and teenagers, not just in Gaza, but throughout the West Bank, by settlers, could not occur without the backing and support of Israeli policymakers and public officials.
Yes, I must tell your viewers, apart from the report on children, which we submitted on 23rd June, 2026. On 15th June, we submitted a separate report, a mandated report to the Human Rights Council, which was of non-state actors. And there we focused on two kinds of actions. One is by the settlers, what you just now referred to. And there we've categorically said the violence by settlers in West Bank is with the full connivance of the Israeli forces. It cannot happen without the active support and connivance of the Israeli forces. They've also focused on violence against Palestinians by the Palestinian armed groups, including Hamas. So when Israel accuses us of ignoring the violence of Hamas, they're completely ignoring this report of ours, which was just submitted about 6-7 days before the report on children. Israel chooses to ignore it. I want to repeat.
But what about the rest of the
elsewhere.
world, Justice, which
Yes.
is also turning a blind eye? You say genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, targeting children and other civilians. So realistically, what difference will your report make?
You're aware that the Security Council has endorsed by Resolution 2803 the creation of the Board of Peace following the Donald J. Trump plan. So when we spoke to the Security Council, I urged them to convene a Board of Peace so that we, as this commission, could make our submission of our findings to the Board of Peace to urge them to use our report to ensure that humanitarian aid reaches Gaza in much larger numbers than it is happening now. Today, what is happening is children in need of urgent medical need are not being allowed to be evacuated from Gaza, even to West Bank and East Jerusalem, where the medical facilities are better. As a result, because of multiple transfers, children are all finding themselves at Rafah crossing. There's a large displacement camp, completely insanitary conditions, and there's a trickle of children being allowed to be evacuated from the Rafah border by Israel. So I requested the Security Council to take a positive action to ensure that there should be an agreement between all countries, leadership being provided by the Security Council, that no child anywhere in the world in the time of hostilities should be allowed to die of starvation. Today, we have 153 children having died in the 2-year period I talked about of malnutrition. And the bombings hadn't stopped after the so-called ceasefire of 7th October.
So who do you
continues
blame,
till
Justice?
yesterday.
Who do you blame for this inaction?
Yes,
Because
so, I was
obviously
just
the
coming to
United
that.
States
Yeah.
continues to shield Israel at the UN Security
Absolutely.
Council.
I would lay the blame on the entire Security Council because they endorsed the so-called peace plan. They're not caring to follow up on it and ask, is the ground situation actually changed?
Would you
I'm also
single
laying-
out the role of the United States, given the fact that it often vetoes any resolution that would attempt to stop this
No,
bloodshed?
which is what is surprising when you look at China and Russia, right? They form part of the Security P5. And they allowed this peace plan to be endorsed. We don't know why. They would normally veto anything that the US does, but it didn't happen here.
But specifically, Justice, the role of the United States in this, how would you describe it?
See, United States is not only encouraging Israel by supply of arms and financial help, but it is turning a blind eye to the complete violation of the very peace plan that US takes pride in having brought about.
Is it complicit in these
Gaza.
war crimes?
Because the supply of arms continues, the bombing is therefore continuing. There can be no doubt at all about it. But it's not, we'll have to go into further depth to see how many countries are involved in supply of arms to Israel. And I fear that there could be many more countries that are actively playing a role in this. Israel has trade deals and arms deals with several countries. Now, US is definitely one major power which is stalling any meaningful aid coming into Gaza because UN mechanisms are under a deep threat. You know, UNRWA has been completely sidelined, prevented from carrying out its work. Its buildings have been demolished. And today the Board of Peace is telling us that UNRWA should be out of the way. Now, this is completely ignoring the good work that UN agencies have been doing.
Let me ask you finally about the recommendations the Commission has made. They talk about reparations, accountability, and the imposition of sanctions. But realistically,
Yes,
which of these recommendations could be enforced and could actually be effective in stopping the killing of children?
See, I think we've made a slight difference in this report by listing out in para 365 of the report the names of the 11 battalions, divisions, and units of the Israeli Defense Forces. We've linked specific battalions and units to specific instances of commission of war crimes, genocide, and crimes against humanity. We can also urge, and it is already happening in some measure, individual member states who are parties to the Geneva Convention, to the Child Rights Convention, and so on and so forth, to initiate in their countries proceedings against the soldiers who formed part of the Israeli Defense Forces, which we have listed in para 365. Over 12,000 US nationals are today serving on the Israeli Defense Forces. Over 6,000 French, over 8,000 German, over 4,000 British, over 700 Australian nationals. They're all serving on the Israeli Defense Forces. In some of the countries, such proceedings have in fact commenced. Some of those countries have requested us to share our evidence, and we're sharing it with such countries. So that is one difference I think this report is already making.
Justice Muralidhar, Chair of the UN Independent International Commission of Inquiry, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Ghida. Thank you.
What we've just heard reflects a clear warning. Grave violations against Palestinian children are being committed in full view of the world by Israeli forces with no meaningful accountability. The United Nations was founded with a promise: to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. If the UN cannot uphold that promise for its most vulnerable, then those opening words of its charter become little more than words on paper. That's all from me, Ghida Fakhry, and the entire team. Thanks for watching.